and then he would sign, once he signs off on it, I send it across to our accounts payable department, and they cut the checks.
Are you familiar with what is generally referred to as the boat case?
I am.
And that is the boat wreck that occurred around February of 2019?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware that the defendant was sued civilly in that particular case?
Yes, sir.
After the boat case happened, did you notice any change in the defendant's demeanor around the office and about his work habits?
I did. He was more distant. Even when he was in the office, he was absent. It was hard to, he's always been hard to sit still and get answers from, and to sign our documents and anything that we had put in his office to sign, but it got extremely worse after the boat accident. He was rarely there, and when he was, the door was closed, and it was almost impossible for us to reach him. He was always on his phone. He was always dealing with something bigger than what we had going on.
As time moved on into the early part of 2021, did that even get worse?
It did. He would come in lots of times, and he was just not his normal self, or what his normal self used to be. It was just very tense, and I don't know how to describe it. It's just, you could tell that it was the boat crash was weighing heavy on him, and it was consuming his life almost, it seemed like, and he was just harder to reach. And there was a couple instances where I referred to him as having his ass on his shoulders, because that's how I felt. It was disrespectful of me to feel that way and to say that out loud, but that's how I felt, because he just wasn't himself with us anymore. He came in, and it was just like, yelled our names and just didn't treat us the same way he did prior to the boat accident.
Was the defendant very protective about anyone going into his office?
He was. There was often times where he would come in on a Monday and say, "Who's been in my office?" And we'd be like, "I don't know, probably the cleaning ladies. We have no idea." He was, it was very cluttered, very unorganized, but he said he knew where his stuff was, that it was organized in his way.
Jury's heard a lot of testimony about this, and just in the interest of time, I'm going to ask it this way. Over the years, in various cases, did the defendant ask you to put disbursements to forge on various disbursement sheets so that settlement checks would be prepared from the trust account made out that way?
Yes, sir, he did. I can't remember when it started, but he told me, to put it on forge, and me knowing Forge Consulting was a legitimate company, I would, on the disbursement sheet, I would put Forge Consulting, and he would say, "No, it's not Forge Consulting. If I wanted to be Forge Consulting, I would have told you Forge Consulting. I want it to be Forge." And I was like, "Well, I don't understand. Isn't the name of the company Forge Consulting?" And he told me that, he described it to me. He said, "Think of it like Forge Consulting is the large company, and Forge is a kind of under that umbrella of it." So he said Forge Consulting is the big name, and then you have all different things they do, including Forge, which is more like a savings account than a trust.
So he would actually get you to change it from Forge Consulting to just Forge?
Correct. Even when across the street at the accounts payable department, they would write the check out to Forge Consulting, lots of times I would have to reach out to them and say, "Hey, you wrote this to Forge Consulting. He says it needs to be Forge." And so lots of times they would have to change that.
Those checks that he would have on disbursement sheets to get cut, made out to Forge, would he often talk to you about picking those up personally?
Yes, I would ask him if I could go ahead and mail it to Michael Gunn at Forge Consulting, because he was our contact. And he would say, "No, you know what? I'm seeing Gunn this weekend. He's coming out to the farm, or we're going to meet halfway tonight and have dinner." He always said that he was going to hand deliver it. So I even got to where I would make file notes in my files, "Alec took check to hand deliver," because I was so worried that he was going to lose these checks. Because he was, a little aloof sometimes, and, would leave keys in his vehicle, would misplace a few things. And so I was so worried that these checks were going to get lost, and then we would have to do a stop payment and reissue the check. So I started making notes where I would remember that I didn't mail it, that it was actually hand delivered.
Well, hand-delivered, at least from who was telling you it was going to be
That's
hand-delivered.
correct, yes.
Who was saying that?
Alex was.
All right, when you're talking about the defendant or Alex Murdaugh, do you see him here in the courtroom today?
I do.
Can you point him out to the jury, please?
Yes, he's over in the, it looks like a navy blue jacket.
Your Honor, can the record reflect she's identified the defendant?
Yes.
You mentioned he would say that, oh, I'm going to see Gunn, I'm meeting him halfway, we're going hunting, things like that. Tell the jury again, who's Michael Gunn?
Michael Gunn he's our contact. He's the person we talk to when it comes to trust annuities with Forge Consulting.
And that's the real Forge, correct?
That's correct,
Not the fake Forge?
not the fake Forge.
Moving into the latter part of 2020, did you have any particular issue arise with a disbursement to Forge that caught your attention?
I did.
Tell me about that if you would, please.
I was currently working from home. I had surgery on Halloween of 2020, and I was working from home, hadn't come back yet. I was planned to come back to the office the following Monday, and on that day, I believe it was December 15th of 2020, I got a phone call from the accounts payable department. Nicole called me, and she's one of the ladies that cuts the checks and works for Jeannie Seckinger. And she told me that she had just got a disbursement sheet over, that Christy had sent over a disbursement sheet in one of my files. It made no sense. She didn't understand it. And I was confused too, because I was like, why didn't he contact me to do my disbursement? Because I'm kind of protective over my files. If I've worked that file the whole time, I want to finish that file. I want to work the whole process of it. And actually the disbursement part is my favorite part of the file, because I want to be able to have that, be there when that client gets their money and gets that closure that they deserve. So I thought it was very odd that Christy was drafting a disbursement in one of my files, and
This was the day you were off work.
that's correct. I was working from home, and I still could have been reached, but I wasn't until Nicole reached out to me and told me.
Keep going.
She told me, she sends it to me by email or text, I can't remember, and I reviewed it, and it didn't make sense to me either. There was a line on it that said the attorney fees were going, or amount of it was going to Forge, and I didn't understand how that was happening. I'd never seen him send attorney fees to Forge before, and so I didn't know that that was even a possibility. And so I called the office, and Christy transferred me to Alec, and I spoke to him and asked him about it. And he said, why did Nicole call you? And I said, well, she doesn't know how to write these checks out, because it doesn't make sense to her. She hasn't ever seen a disbursement like this. And he said, I'll take care of it. And so he said, I'll call Nicole, I'll take care of it. And so I remember talking to Nicole later and say, so what did he say? What was the reason behind it? And she said, he said that they can structure their attorney fees, and that's what that check was for.
Did you have a subsequent discussion with the defendant about that?
I did, and he told me the same thing. He said it was something that they've been able to do forever. He just never took advantage of it before, and so now he decided that he was going to start structuring those attorney fees where it would make interest, have interest drawn. And so it made sense, because why not? Why not, instead of having that money sit somewhere, put it somewhere where it's going to draw more money?
His explanation to you made sense.
Yes, it did.
On its face.
Yes.
Do you remember the name of that case?
That was the Hirschberger case.
I'm going to show you. Stand by. We'll show you what's already been admitted to evidence of States 429, and see if you recognize this document.
Yes, I do. This is the disbursement that was in December of 2020 that I was talking about.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Put it up on the screen. At that point in time, we're in December of 2020, is that right?
That's correct.
After the defendant gave you that explanation that seemed valid to you on your face, did that matter just kind of go away at that point in time?
It did. It was kind of, always at the back of my mind because I still felt like there should have been some kind of paper trail, but yeah, the explanation worked that he gave me, and so I was trying to just go along with it because I thought it was valid.
As we move on into January 2021, did another incident happen that came to your attention as it related to disbursements?
Yes, the end of January, it was a Friday afternoon. I left early that day to take my mom to the eye doctor, and kind of the same scenario of kind of an exact repeat of December happened again. Nicole from Accounts Payable called me, and I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "Well, I've got another one." And so Christy had drafted a disbursement in a case referred to as Moore, and she had sent it over, and once again, it had the same wording and kind of confusion that the Hirschberger one had a month previous. So she didn't really understand it again. She was still trying to say, I feel like we need more information on this, and I said, I do too. And so kind of the same scenario as before. I reached out to Alex, he reached out to Nicole, and ultimately the checks got written. But it was the same scenario, as you can see on here. The $91,867.50 was attorney fees that were structured that went straight to Forge, to the fake, what we now know was the fake Forge.
All right. And is that still in the Hirschberger matter you're talking
That's the
about?
Hirschberger one, and on the Thomas More one,
We'll
it was...
get there in a second. But when
Okay.
you got that call, do you remember where you were, the second call?
Yeah, the Thomas More, I was at the eye doctor with my mom.
All right, I'm still on Hirschberger. Do you remember where you were on that
Oh,
second?
I was home. I'd had surgery, and I was home recovering.
And I'm going to show you this, and we're still in the same exhibit, that being 429. Do you recognize that at all? Let me hand this exhibit to you. It's probably easier that way. I'll just take a flip through it if you would, please.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is what we refer to now as the second Hirschberger disbursement. It was on the UIM portion of the case and liability portion. So once again, the PMP attorney's fees were routed to Forge in the amount of $83,333.33.
All right, thank you. All right, you had started to talk about Thomas More. Is that another incident that came to your attention as we're moving into early 2021?
Yes, sir. That one, like I said, was at the end of January. Once again, I was out of the office. I was at an eye doctor with my appointment with my mom. Got the call from Nicole. She said it's the same scenario. But this time it was all the funds that was in client's trust, which was $125,000, I believe, and all those funds were being routed. That was attorney fees and client money that was being routed to the fake Forge.
And this was another one of your cases, is that right?
It was. So another situation where I'm out of the office. It's almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. Christy drafts the disbursement. Alex signs it. They send it over in my absence.
When these instances are happening that you're describing to the jury, where you happen to be out of the office, and these are your cases, right?
That's correct.
And all of a sudden you're getting communications that the defendant is having Christy draft some disbursements. In any of these cases, was there anything going on that something happened and had to be done that very day that you just happened to be out of the office?
I didn't think so because, in particular, the Thomas More case, we were working on the third party portion of the case, but there was also a workers' comp portion that another attorney was working on. And when you're working on a workers' comp case, if you settle the third party first, you can't disperse it until the workers' comp portion is taken care of, because workers' comp always has a huge lien that you have to negotiate for the client. So the money was supposed to sit there. It was my understanding it would probably be sitting there another year until the workers' comp portion of the case was settled. So those funds didn't need to go anywhere. So it was very odd that all of a sudden they're all sent to Forge because they were supposed to remain in the account, was my understanding.
Do you take pride in the work that you do on these complex cases?
I do.
Do you know your cases very well?
I'd say I do.
And was there any reason of which you were aware that things had to be happening the day that they were supposed?
I did. No, it definitely put up another yellow flag, and it made me think about the previous one that happened in Hirschberger in December, because both of them were kind of the same scenarios. Me out of the office, someone else drafting it, and not that we can't work in each other's files. We can, but it's easy to miss something if it's not your file. If I had to go in somebody else's file and draft a disbursement, I may not know that there's a lien or a certain promised medical bill or anything else that needs to be paid. So that's why, to me, it's easier if somebody that's worked the case actually drafts the disbursement, because they know all the deductions that have to come out.
Was the defendant using the opportunity of you being out of the office to push these things through?
Yes, in hindsight, it was easy to see that the chaos, the sending it over at 10 minutes before 5 p.m. was kind of a way of part of that little hurricane, a little tornado portion. Just sending it over when most people are gone, and it's just going to get done quickly and no questions asked.
You said that the Thomas More line was particularly unusual because it was workers' comp and those funds couldn't be dispersed yet, correct? To your understanding?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever have a conversation with the defendant about why these funds were dispersed?
I did, and he explained to me that he had gotten permission that since the money was going to be sitting there another year, that they were going to send it to Forge and let it draw interest, and then that would be money that would draw interest on for the client as well as the firm, because it was both portions of the money.
I'm going to show you what's already been admitted into evidence. It states 328, and see if you recognize this document.
Yes, this is the Thomas More disbursement that I'm referring to, that where the entire client trust amount of $125,000.
Do you recognize the signature down at the bottom of the page?
I do. Alex signed it where it says R. Alexander Murdaugh, and then where the client's signature is, that is not the client's signature. It's Alex's handwriting.
You recognize his handwriting from working for him for 9 years?
I do.
Did the defendant have a case going on around this time involving Mack trucks?
He did. What we refer to as the Ferris case. We actually went to Columbia and had a bench trial in that case in January of 21.
And did you work on that case to some extent?
I did.
Okay. Was that one of the ones assigned to you?
Yes.
Was the defendant the only lawyer on that case, or were there other lawyers?
No, there was 2 co-counsels that had brought us in. Wayne Ridgway was the first attorney that received that case. He reached out to Chris Wilson's office, and Chris joined the case as well. And then Chris reached out to our firm, and so now there's a third attorney, which was Alec, involved in it.
Ultimately, was that case tried before a judge?
It was bench trial, like I said, in January of 2021.
And did the judge issue a verdict in favor of the firm's clients?
Did, yes, sir. And the next month, I think sometime in February, we got a very nice verdict for the clients.
Who was going to be dispersing the fees in that once the money came in? Was that going to be PMPED, or was it going to be the other attorney's
Chris
firm?
Wilson's office.
Had the firm PMPED, had it accrued costs in the course of that litigation?
Yes.
Expenses?
Yes,
And did you prepare those and send those to Chris Wilson's office, or how did that work?
I did. I put the totals in an email and sent them to, Alec wanted me to send him the totals by email, and so that's what I did. And then I guess he sent them to Chris after that.
All right. And then after that happened, do you remember what month the money came in, roughly?
In May,
Well, let me slow you down. Once you've done that, when the money comes in, you said Chris Wilson's office is going to be handling that disbursement, correct?
correct.
What are you expecting to happen next?
I'm expecting copies of the settlement paperwork, copies of the disbursement sheets signed by the client, and I'm expecting 2 fee checks and 2 expense reimbursement checks, because there's 2 cases. It was a case for the deceased and a case for his wife. So I'm expecting 4 checks total.
All right. And you're about to say, and I cut you off, you said something happened in May. Did something happen related to the Ferris case in May?
Yes, I received by mail the settlement package from Chris Wilson's office, but all it contained was a cover letter and the 2 expense reimbursement checks. So I emailed Vicki Lyman, which is Chris Wilson's secretary, and said something like, hey girl, I got these expense checks in, when can I expect the attorney fee checks? And she replied to my email telling me that, excuse me, hey friend, the attorney's got that money at disbursement. And I was really shocked because I didn't even know when the disbursement took place. I was never supplied copies of it or anything.
What's your thought when Vicki says that? What did you think may have happened?
Well, I called her and I said, you already gave the checks. I was like, I don't think we've received them. And she was like, yeah, they were done at disbursement in March. And so I asked her first to send me over copies of the disbursement sheets and where I could look at those. And then I reached out across to our accounts payable just to make sure that checks somehow bypassed me and went straight to into the client trust, to their department. And they told me no, that they didn't have any such checks on the books either. And I was like, okay. So I assumed that they gave Alec the checks and he's lost them. They're misplaced. They're somewhere in his truck. They're somewhere in a file folder stuck and just kind of hid away and he's forgotten to give them to me.
Did you say that to Vicki? Like, come on, why'd you give them to my boss?
Why? I said, why would you do that? I was like, why would you give checks to the attorney? Why wouldn't you send them straight to me where I can get them deposited?
I'm going to put States 312 that's already in evidence, and this is the page marked Bait Stamp 2371 for the record up on the screen. Can you see that on your little screen? Do I need to bring that in?
I can see it.
And can you tell the jury what that is?
That is the email I was talking about where I told her I just got the expenses, but where's the fee? And she says, it's because your boss and mine and Liz's got their fees once they were signed, duh.
Did you have a conversation with Alec at this point, or what did you do next?
I did.
So you called the finance in your own firm and said, hey, did we get this check? And they
Correct.
said no.
They said no. And so I verified that. And then I asked Vicki, I said, are you positive? And she said yes. And I was like, okay, I'll go see if he remembers where they're at. So he happened to be in the office by that time. His door was closed. I went in, he was on the phone. And I kind of kept checking and going back. Eventually I got to speak to him and he was still kind of on the phone, but he was like, no, I didn't get those checks. And I was like, are you sure? And he said, yeah. And I was kind of back and forth. And I'm like, he said he didn't get them. Are you sure? And this kind of went back and forth for a few minutes and over the course of the rest of the day. And I said, hey, he just told me that Chris was still holding those funds in trust. I was like, I don't understand, you say that they've been cut. I was like, can you send me copies of stuff? Because I don't see anything. And he's telling me their funds are in trust. And she was like, Annette, I know for a fact that the checks are cut. There is no money in trust. And the reason I know that is because when the checks were written to Alec, I knew it was a bit odd because they were written to Richard, they were written out to him personally instead of the firm. And I said,
They were written out to him personally instead of the firm.
Correct.
Why did that stick out in her mind? Why did that stick out in your mind?
Because common sense tells me that the attorney fees belong to the firm, where the firm, I don't know, I didn't understand the complete breakdown until Jeannie went over it in her testimony, but I knew by common sense that the funds belong to the firm. And then once they do whatever percentages and everything they need to do, then the attorney gets his portion later. So I knew it wasn't right, that it shouldn't have never gone to an individual attorney. It should go to the firm as a whole.
When you asked the defendant, said, hey, Vicky says you already got those, and he tells you what?
He told me that Chris was holding that money in trust, that it had not been dispersed yet.
Did he tell you Vicky's wrong?
Yeah, he told me Vicky's wrong. I don't care what she's telling you, she's wrong.
What was his demeanor when you were inquiring,
Just kind of like, just shooing me out of his office, like, I don't have time for this.
After Vicky tells you that it was odd because the checks had been made out to the defendant personally instead of the law firm, what did you do next?
I asked her, I said, are you sure? And she said, yes. And she said, yeah, it was written out to him. Well, first I was like, I'm sorry, what did you say? And I made her repeat it to make sure I heard correctly. And she was like, and then kind of while she was saying it out loud, I think it kind of registered to her, oh, wait, that probably wasn't the right thing to do. Because she kind of hushed after that and didn't want to talk and kind of wanted to get off the phone with me. And so I still kind of tried to question Alec over the next couple days and tried to get a reasonable explanation of what was going on, because in my mind, I'm still hoping he just lost the checks and this was all just a misunderstanding. But at the back of my mind, there's this huge red flag telling me this is not right. What is going on?
Did you eventually take this issue to anyone else since you couldn't get an answer about it?
Yes, I eventually, I don't know the exact date, but I eventually emailed Jeannie Seckinger and asked her if she was in the office because I really needed to speak to her. And she said she would be back later that day. And so I went into her office and I had everything printed out and kind of showed her and told her my concerns. And she was instantly on, on high alert as well, because, it didn't look good. We were still both hoping that it was a misunderstanding, just this one-off, something silly that happened, but we both had that nagging feeling of, this is not good. Something is definitely wrong.
Did Jeannie instruct you to do anything?
She did not. She said that she would talk to him about it, and she kept the paperwork that I gave her.
Were you ever asked to send another email to Vicky asking for particular documents?
Yeah, actually, it was kind of my idea. I kind of told Jeannie, I was like, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't you send me an email telling me what we need, and then I'll forward that email from myself, and, to see if we can get copies of everything where we can figure all this out and eliminate it. Because, at this point, we want to prove that suspicion we had was wrong and that everything's really okay. So she did. She forwarded me an email. And
Slow you down. I'm still on States 312. What's been bait stamped is 2374. And is this the email that you just described that Jeannie forwarded to you requesting the documentation for the Ferris fees?
It is. Underneath where, Jeannie texts there or emails there and tells me exactly what she needs and kind of is very specific.
And what date was that? I'm sorry.
That was May 27th at 11:40 a.m.
All right. And then going over to 2373 in the same exhibit, is this the email right here that you then forwarded to Vicki Lyman at Chris Wilson's office?
Yes, it was. I forwarded that email that Jeannie sent me on the same day, May 27th. And I knew she was on vacation, but I went ahead and sent this to her. And then when I knew she had time to get back from vacation, I sent this follow-up on the Strand on June 2nd and requesting it again.
And did you get a response email from Vicki Lyman in Chris Wilson's office?
Yeah, she said she didn't, this doesn't involve her, and she said she would forward it to Chris. And we were basically just asking for copies of everything where we could clear this matter up and, like I said, we wanted our suspicion to be wrong.
Look at him.
Is that item already in evidence?